Hello and welcome. You're watching The Mint. I'm Andy Hodges. This is ZTN Prime coming to you live from ZTN Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Now, last year, 2022, speaking to both formal and informal business leaders, was a tough year all round. Inflation hitting 285% before closing the year at 244% year on year. Rampant parallel market rates hitting 1,100 to $1 at the end of December 2022. Interest rates rising from 80 to 200%. Power and water challenges. All of this had an impact on business. Now today on The Mint, we speak to possibly the one person in Zimbabwe who can give us an holistic view, not just on Zimbabwean business, but also the African and global viewpoint that business needs to succeed. After the break, I'll be speaking to Zimbabwe's Minister of Industry and Commerce, Dr. Sekai I Nzenza. Don't go away, The Mint, we'll be right back.
Engithi days etekasi siphila labantu sikhamba labantu sihlala labantu engithi days etekasi agriculture the lifestyle.
There are many days of our lives, but there's nothing ever like a guava. I mean, day at ekas. It's a hot. Sing happy.
Tumane country park emakwekwe empopoma inkethe lufefe lesizitha chabanana agriculture the lifestyle.
Yes, khona lapha emakhokoba lo pe mula just emakwekwe
entomba nekogulu
because of iphumula okamashobana umzilikazi inketha zibheki baba esizinda baba. My name is Mzo 7AK Mr. Gaga Gugu. Kulumis Kiwange.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome back. You're watching The Mint, and this is ZTN Prime, coming to you from Harare, Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe Minister of Industry and Commerce, Dr. Sekai I Nzenza. Minister, welcome to The Mint.
Thank you, Andy, for having me, and Happy New Year to you.
Oh, Happy New Year to you, and it's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
Minister, you heard in my opening statement some of the challenges faced by business in 2022, including high interest rates, high inflation, and possibly some issues around taxation. Minister, your take. How would you summarize Zimbabwe's business environment last year?
Last year, from the way you presented, had the challenges. The business environment mitigated against those challenges. And first of all, foremost, what really was positive is the auction system by the RBZ that enabled a number of companies to access the raw materials that were very difficult to get. And also we from the Ministry of Industry were able to prioritize some of those companies because our main aim was to increase local production and also to address some of those bottlenecks that were affecting industry. What was quite exciting about 2022 is the capacity utilization, which I'll talk about.
Let's move to that directly, Minister. I mean, we looked at levels of around 60% capacity utilization last year. Okay, as I said, there were challenges with power and possibly consumer demand maybe took a dip based on the inflation, and of course, particularly in the second half of the year with prices going up. But let's maybe give us your own take on industrial capacity utilization.
At the end of last year, I presented to Cabinet the State of Industry report, which I'm going to share with you. What it did was to present an overview at each manufacturing sector. The President gave me a mandate when I got into this job. And I got into this job in November 2019. Yes, there were challenges. And in March 2020, then COVID hit. So you'd think, my goodness, capacity utilization is low, and suddenly we've got COVID. What is going to happen? But the president said essential services must continue. And when the borders closed, we saw that as an opportunity because we had become a country that imports everything, importing even toothpicks.
And the figures were ridiculous, weren't they? $5-6 billion a year.
Absolutely.
Of matches, if I remember.
And why would we do that? Yet we have the natural resources. We also have the skills, especially the human resources in this country. And the challenge, which I want to talk about a little bit, was the equipment. Now, Zimbabwe in the past was a booming industry, but we realized that we have to retool, and we also need to embrace technology. And in embracing technology, it means increased production, creation of jobs.
I mean, that takes me to a point. I mean, I was going to ask this, but I might as well ask you now. I mean, the fourth industrial revolution is here. Clearly, COVID did create a new way of doing business, particularly online. Much more technology is required. And also, I suppose, to a certain degree, manpower in terms of automation, using AI and so forth. How, as your ministry embraces, has business embraced this? What are you actually doing to really sort of, if I can say, kickstart business into the new era of doing business?
Let me just narrow from a very broader perspective of industry and look at industry sector by sector. And just briefly, look at the leather sector, for example. And the problem, firstly, I'll look at the problem. The problem was we're exporting raw hides to Italy, to Europe. You are exporting the most beautiful hides from this country. And it goes there. They make the beautiful leather jacket, Louis Vuitton bag, and where's the value addition? It's missing. Where's the creation of jobs? So we looked at the leather value chain and launched a strategy in Bulawayo. And since then, we've now worked with different companies, Zambezi Leather Tenders, for example, where we look at the latest technology in leather processing and also increased local manufacturing, not just for local consumption, but also for export. So when you look at leather, we're not just looking at Mombe, we're also looking at crocodile skins. And again, although we are exporting a lot of crocodile skins, we're also now looking at local manufacturing within the leather value chain.
Which of course creates jobs as well, doesn't it?
Create jobs as well. But let me just tell you about butter, for example. And looking at butter, we saw that they need the latest. This allows us to ensure that the equipment that needs to come in, we support them. And once the equipment comes in, we then ensure that it begins to operate on time. Whatever bottlenecks they have, we are there to support them. So as a result, what is the impact on the consumer? The impact is that you are now able to access, for school kids, the best leather shoes using Zimbabwean leather. Now, that's one example.
Minister, I am going to touch more on the value addition, of course, and also the value chains a bit later on. But I want to move on to your allocation. Look, I will accept that the Minister of Finance did state that most ministries had asked for, they put in bids that he couldn't meet because we don't have the money. And your ministry was allocated by Treasury 15.6 billion Zimbabwe dollars for 2023. Your views, is this sufficient at meeting all the needs and covering all your plans for industry and commerce this year?
I can't say it meets all my needs because my needs are big. But having said that, I'm still happy for some of what we got, because I want to stay focused, and I'm focusing on industrial development cooperation. Now, why am I doing that? Let's look at the fertilizer value chain. What has happened to Ukraine and the prices in fertilizer shooting up, and that affects our food security in the country. But industrial development cooperation is also responsible for the raw minerals, where we have vast amounts of phosphate. And that is the natural resource that needs to be processed, and it needs the latest technology. So what we did at Lorowa Minerals was to thank Professor Mtuli to kickstart the manufacturing of local fertilizer. Now the president came to commission a blending plant at ZFC, at Zimfos, not so long ago. And we also plan to be commissioning a granulation plant. Now that money that I'm talking about is coming from Treasury, and it's going to produce results. So as I go along, once the need arrives, I'll be going back to Professor Mtuli to say, I want to ensure that there's food security in the country. But before I stop, I want to talk about a very exciting project in Rushinga. Rushinga in Mashonaland Central. We have some of the vast resources of limestone, mountains of it. And this company in Rushinga called G&W was down. The equipment was redundant. Again, with support from Treasury, we got $1 million. We now have a new plant, and we are supplying all the lime that's required right across Zimbabwe from Rushinga.
I didn't know that. These are some of the projects that really are taking us forward in terms of a country and business on the business sense. One major announcement that Professor Ngube made in his budget presentation was the expiration of the suspension of duty on import of basic commodities, and of course it wasn't renewed. Certain sectors of industry had been complaining a lot about this import duty relaxation or zeroing, because of course it affected their own consumption, because they were now competing with imported products that they were making locally. What are your views on that?
My strategy is to promote local production, and I have the local content policy that we are implementing, and also in collaboration with the Buy Zimbabwe group. We want to ensure that we use the natural resources in this country to produce locally. And that way we're able to ensure that the product that comes in, that's made here, is also meeting the standards. But we got porous borders. So when we have so much coming in from detergents to you name it, to skin lightening creams, we can't control what comes in through the borders illegally. But what we are interested in ensuring that it's happening is increased local production using the latest technology. And above all, ensuring that the consumer is able to access locally made goods that meet quality and are also healthy.
Minister, before I take a breather, I just wanted to really pick your brain on this issue. I mean, at the recent Zimbabwe-Rwanda Business Conference, which we both attended, it was revealed by Rwanda that it took them 6 hours, I believe, to process an investment application. Speaking to Zida at the same conference, they said 14 to 16 days. And of course, Zimbabwe is 140 out of 190 ranked countries on the Ease of Doing Business Index globally. Is your ministry working to improve the ease of doing business in the country? And if you are, how?
And we have to look at where we were before in order to understand where we are now. And where we are now, we're not there yet. But there's an improvement. And we're working very closely with Zida to improve that. But step by step. Look at the borders, for example. The Bad Bridge Border Post, that is an example of the ease of doing business. The one-stop border post in Chirundu, again working with COMESA, ease of doing business. But we're also working closely with Rwanda. We gotta get lessons from them. And the collaboration between us and Rwanda is also enabling us to improve on some of the areas that need improvement.
Well, it's time to take a breather, and after the break, we continue our in-depth discussion with Zimbabwe's Minister of Industry and Commerce, Dr. Sekai I Nzenza. Don't go away, The Mint. We'll be right back.
Buckle up and prepare to be taken on a riveting journey, unlocking the very best of Zimbabwe. Architecture and interior design, art and entertainment, people, products, produce, the great outdoors, hidden gems, and so much more. Experience the good life from the comfort of your home. Only on Sekai I, Mondays at 6:30 p.m. on ZTN Prime, DSTV channel 294.
Welcome back. This is The Mint. I'm Andy Hodges. We continue our discussion with Zimbabwe's Minister of Industry and Commerce, Dr. Sekai I Nzenza. Minister, I'd like to talk about prices. I think it's a very topical issue, particularly to Zimbabwean citizens. In your view, what can be done to stabilize prices for the long term? I mean, we're getting reports here at ZTN Prime, for example, of people changing their dietary, needs, their dietary eating. They're buying less bread. They're not eating as much, eggs at breakfast and so forth. I mean, what is your view about how we can stabilize prices? Because I think a lot of Zimbabweans, this is what affects them because it hits their pocket.
We, from the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, do weekly monitoring of the 14 basic commodities that affect every single household. Before Christmas, we engaged the Retailers Association, and I'm pleased that we are having a platform for dialogue. And I would say for the first time, we got to a level where there is an understanding on how best we can stabilize the prices. Now, understandably, the manufacturers will say, look, the cost of raw materials continues to go up. The situation in Eastern Europe. And as a result, that will have an impact on the cost of production. And they also need to increase prices. But through dialogue, we've come to a level of understanding whereby, when we look at bread, for example, it has remained stable. But I'm also excited that the Ministry of Agriculture is recording a bumper harvest in wheat. Because we are growing our own wheat, not importing or importing less, that means the price of bread will remain stable. You mentioned that food habits are being affected, but I'm also pleased to say there's a growing interest in production of sweet potatoes. You know, when I was growing up, we didn't always have bread, hardly any bread, but we would have our tea with sweet potatoes. And we are now looking back to those food stuffs that helped us to grow as children. We are on a healthy drive where traditional foods are very much on the increase.
Minister, I've heard this said. I think you're called the queen of value addition, if I may say that. And all agree, of course, that it's a necessary step in achieving a significant uplift in the prices paid for Zimbabwe's precious resources and our exports. However, critics say that we really haven't moved as fast as we would have liked to have done to value add. I mean, what is the government and your ministry in particular doing to promote value addition?
When they called me Queen of Value Addition, at first I thought, oh, hang on, is that a nickname? But I'm pleased to be called that because I can show there are results. The president gave me a mandate with the National Development Strategy 1. And he mandated me to move up the value chains. And what does that mean? What it means is that as a country, we have massive natural resources in agriculture and also in mining. But the challenge that has been happening, which we are on the road to overcome, is to stop the exports of raw materials. Let me give you examples. The cotton to clothing. In the past, and you would know that we had the best towels.
Shirts, we used to make everything, didn't we?
We used to make everything.
Beautiful cotton.
The industry, Julie White, David Whitehead, all those companies, the finest cotton. But we have been exporting our lint as it is. So when it goes to wherever it goes, outside Zimbabwe's borders, we are losing the value addition part to outside. And from cotton, you get cotton seed. You crush cotton seed, you get cotton seed oil. And the byproducts of what you crush is what you make for stock feeds. And not only that, you then make the finest fabric. But we have companies now that we've resuscitated. David Whitehead is now up and running. So this is quite exciting in the cotton to clothing value chain. But what it also requires is that the Ministry of Agriculture, because we basically tied at the umbilical cord.
Everything is connected, isn't it?
Everything is connected. So I've talked about leather before. Now I'm talking about cotton. But I would also talk about soya.
The cooking oil, of course.
The cooking oil, soybeans. And we do import crude soya bean oil as far as Argentina. Comes in as crude. Comes here, is processed. And imagine bringing soya bean crude oil from outside. We've got the soil, we've got the water, we have the expertise. We need more technology to increase our production. But the Minister of Agriculture is doing remarkably well through the rural industrialization and mechanization program. So the two ministers, Industry and Commerce and Minister of Agriculture, when we look at value addition, each crop has a strategic approach to increase the value within the country.
Now, you talked about the president giving you the mandate to value add, but he also gave you another mandate, Minister, and that was to turn around or revive Zisco Steel. Now, maybe you could give us an update on where do we stand with Zisco Steel?
Firstly, let me give you the figures of how much steel we've been importing. $1 billion.
Wow.
But having recognized this challenge, and the president also gave me that mandate to revive Zisco Steel. It took some time because I wanted to ensure that the investor who comes on board meets the whole due diligence process. And I was reporting to Cabinet regularly. So we started off with 12, went down to 9 potential investors until we got to 1, and that's Kuvimba. So Kuvimba has hit the ground running. And what is happening now is that the final agreements between Zisco Steel and Kuvimba were signed around the 22nd of December. And we're looking at a two-pronged approach, commercializing the mining processes at Zisco, but also making steel. So to do those two, we need the latest technology again. You see, Andy, we keep on going back to technology.
Innovation, yeah.
Because that's what's required. But we're also looking at the latest technology from the countries that have proven that ability to do so.
But Minister, some may argue, though, that surely it may be even cheaper to build a new plant, because nowadays getting a steel plant isn't as expensive as it used to be, instead of rather going to Zisco Steel and trying to resuscitate all the old equipment that's there. I mean, what is the plan?
It's a very good question, because what we're doing now is to bring the experts in steel making to look at what's there right now. What can still be used, what can't be used, what is scrap metal, and scrap metal is of value as well.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And
but lots of people are making money from Zisco from scrap metal, weren't they?
Yes, but now we are very much in control
I hope so, yes,
on what's happening at Zisco Steel. And we have companies from Germany, SMS, that's one of the biggest companies that make steel making plants. So they've already been here, and Kuvimba is in conversation with them. We also have Italian companies, South African companies, but more exciting is the Zimbabwean experts who are in the diaspora, who are now coming on board, not only just to support Zimbabwe, but to ensure that we increase the skill from abroad into Zimbabwe and ensure that there's increased steel for downstream and upstream industries. So
Timelines to get from where we are, because of course this coast has been mothballed for so long, and getting the experts in and getting the technical analysis. What do you think the timeline is to get Cisco really operating, at least to some degree, producing steels?
The two-pronged approach is taking place this year. Definitely this year, because as we speak, there's a lot of movement already.
Minister, 30 million worth of special drawing rights were allocated toward industry. Just briefly, what is the intended purpose of the funds? What actually will they be spent on?
I spoke earlier about antiquated equipment and embracing the digital revolution. And I foresee that equipment, that SDR, is finances that are required to retool, refurbish in order to increase production.
Well, that's it for today's episode of The Mint. Of course, we're speaking to Zimbabwe's Minister of Industry and Commerce, Dr. Sekai I Nzenza. Minister, thank you for appearing on The Mint. Now, of course, join us 2:05 p.m. Central African time for The Mint every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday and Friday. And of course on Wednesday for Beat the Market, a show that deep dives into all things finance, equities and markets, here live on ZTN Prime. I will see you next week, Monday at 6 a.m. bright and early for the only show that you should wake up to. And that, of course, is Morning Rush. I'm Andy Hodges. Goodbye and please, you all be safe.